Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Zach from the ZAP podcast. I have always wanted to start a podcast, but I never knew where to start or where to even begin. And then I stumbled across the Anchor app. I love the Anchor app because it's completely free and it has all the editing and uploading capabilities that you need right from your phone. So it's super easy and super user friendly. If you've always wanted to start a podcast, go download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, let's get on to the episode. All right, what's up, everyone? It's Zach, and today I'm here with a very special guest. I'm here with Tim Schantz. Tim, how are you tonight?
Doing great.
Good, good. Glad to hear it, and thank you for taking some time to be a part of the podcast today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Awesome. So Tim is someone that I've known for a little while now. We actually met in retail, and he's currently still involved in the retail industry. And also, his big passion outside of that is art. He's an artist, doing a lot of different sculpture work and different art projects. And that's just a little about Tim and his passions. But do you mind kind of talking a little bit about your background, what you like to do, what your passions are, and just all that good stuff?
Oh, golly. Yeah. I went to school way back in the day. I was undeclared for a while. And I kind of organic chemistry of all things, kind of surreptitiously. And I was enjoying the science for quite a while. I got to Wayne State and I realized that higher math was not my thing. So despite I kind of come from a blue collar background, so I was like, oh, good study. Through that I couldn't sustain, I guess, well, to go for the higher level. So it's well my fallback. And it was art, and I was like, well, I guess I'll go for number two, which is art.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I got a bachelor's from Eastern, 2004. That sounds right.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it was 2007. Well, it was early on, and yeah,
Early 2000s, yeah. Okay.
And been working at Target for a while. I tried a couple different blue collar gigs on the side. The wife just consumed money. That's
Okay.
I was working myself to death. Now, Target, and more seriously pursue. Before I was have the I guess the drive to make money doing it. I didn't need the money.
Okay. Right.
And then while I was married, I wanted to make more money, but I didn't have the. And now
Right.
I've made myself that time, and I've sustained making it more of a career. I was gonna wait till like I have a good opportunity to make money more vigorously.
Okay. Awesome. And so, Tim, even before you got the degree and really pursued art after organic chemistry, were you still doing art from like a young age and everything?
Drew probably no more than the average kid.
Okay.
I took a survey art course in my freshman year. Took a couple art classes, electives to fill in my. Because I was working at Frank's Nurseries and Crafts. That's. I came across a package of.
Okay.
That was like 1998, around there. But so yeah, I came across that and with it, see how it worked in it.
Tim, are you there? I think I might have lost you. All right, yeah. So Tim, you were mentioning that you had like the celluclay that you got at work, and then you kind of just thought like you'd start messing around with that. And that is kind of what started some of the artwork and the sculpting.
Yeah, celluloid is like a commercial paper mache composite material. Just add water sort of thing to like.
Okay.
It was pretty cool. And then yeah, and then I was at Wayne State doing the chemistry thing. I left Wayne State, went to actually Schoolcraft, met a very cool professor there. I got to play with some actual clay. Um, he was a pretty cool guy actually, and he liked that I was motivated to work with clay. So he kind of took me under his wing, and I learned how to make the clay and the glazes. And I was like his lab assistant. He was like, he got like the prereqs out of the way in the first couple weeks, and he was like, "Yeah, have fun, go at it."
Awesome. Okay. So, and it's really sculpting is kind of like where the passion lies with your great. That's the main, or is that the only artwork that you do right now?
Yeah, I mean, I bought paints. I still barely use them. I mean, I paint the sculptures, but it's not quite the same, as painting on canvas. I have canvases and I have paints. I have a bunch of brushes. I haven't really set aside any time to do it. The last time I did any sort of painting was like Mother's Day a couple of years ago. I made something for my wife. At the
Okay.
time, the kids still have it, but you know, I wouldn't call it my best work. I was trying to do like a Van Gogh sort of thing, and it did
Okay.
not work out the way I wanted.
Gotcha, gotcha. And, when it comes to art, I mean, I know you mentioned Van Gogh, but, like, is there any other artists, or maybe Van Gogh's the answer, that, like, inspired you or that you draw inspiration from?
I mean, Van Gogh's more color and it is paint. No, there was Alberto Giacometti, Rodin, in terms of painters. Sometimes some of Picasso's three-dimensional stuff is interesting. Duchamp and let's see. I mean, there's a few other surrealists. I was taking a closer look at Francis Bacon because he's got some pretty dark stuff. So it's not a real big stretch for me to get into some Bacon stuff. I was gonna add a little humor to it, but there's a few sculptors, mostly from earlier in the 19th century, that I look at.
Okay, gotcha. And, like, I guess how would you describe your style, or do you have, like would you put a definition on it, or is it kinda just, like, whatever you feel that you wanna create is what you'll do with your art direction?
I mean, that's generally how it is. I mean, it depends. Sometimes I have the concept down. Sometimes, well, there's like one piece in particular where I was reusing something, and I was like, I had the image in my head, and I was like, and it was basically um, a free form kind of head, vaguely African in shape, but it's got my face, and it was attached to like a more of like a sun disk in
Okay,
the traditional Egyptian sense by like a by a thin line, and I added some other elements to it. But at first, I was like, okay, I know this is what I want. He's like, but why do I want it? What is this supposed to mean?
right.
And then I was just about done with it, and I was like, oh, that's what it is. Yeah. So sometimes the form comes before the meaning to it, the
Okay.
subtext, and sometimes I have an idea, and I was like, okay, how do I show this in a sculptural form? It's like I have an idea I want to express. How do I express it? So it
Got it.
goes both ways.
Okay.
But
That makes sense.
yeah, in terms of like aesthetics, I try not to have any. I don't like straight lines, so like I use a lot of curvy lines, a lot of organic shapes, and that's the thing is um, when that happens, like, and that's I guess across every plane. So like a circle's good, but you know that's still straight on one of those planes, so I have to bend it. A sphere is better. Uh,
Okay.
a more of an ellipsoid shape. I don't like straight lines, I guess, in my work because it's kind of boring.
Okay, I was gonna ask, is it if there's a reason why, and you would say it's just 'cause it seems a little boring, or you could get a little more creative than that?
Yeah, yeah. To me, it is boring, and at the same time, I know straight lines have never really been my strong suit. But it is just, I want it to be different from every angle. I mean, that's the point of a 3D sculpture.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to, let's say, like maybe you have an idea or you're starting to sculpt, how long does it usually take you to complete one of your sculptures?
I usually work in, I guess, stages. Like I'll have like 5 or 6, maybe 7 going at the same time, and
Okay.
I'll do different parts of them all in one session, and then and then kind of cycle through. Um, when I had free time, like there's been a few that have been like I'll work in them straight through, and they were one of those things where everything I wanted just came together, and it might take a couple weeks altogether. I know when I was still in my sculpture class at Eastern, we had a critique right before the winter break or Christmas break, and I had a couple ideas from that critique, and I was like, "Ooh, I want to do that." So I spent my Christmas break working on 2 sculptures, and like I had them ready to go by the time the class resumed. And my professor was like, "Why didn't you make these in class?" And I was like, just didn't have that timing down. Sorry, bud.
Gotcha. Okay. And is there any specific reason why you like to have multiple projects going on at a time?
uh, Part of it just has to do with the drawing,
Okay.
and I do, I guess, entertain different ideas. But yeah, it is a water based sort of thing with the paper mache composite, so it does take some time to dry. And
Okay.
but I do have different ideas going, and then there's some times where I'll hit it like a roadblock on how to finish the design. So with that, I don't want to just stop working. So I can like shift gears and like, okay, well, I kind of hit an impasse on this. I'll work on this other one more, and then hopefully the idea comes to me, and that does usually eventually happen. And sometimes, working on one sculpture helps me figure out what to do with the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like, I don't know, I feel like when people say like they're stuck on like a problem or something on their homework, if you stop working on it and, switch your attention to something else and come back to it, it might seem a little more clear to you then.
Yeah, a little fresh perspective.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, I've had things sit for way longer than they probably should have, but they set it off to the side and was like I've had some sculptures that I made like 10, 15 years ago, and I was working on it, and I was like, this doesn't, it's just not where I want it to be. It doesn't look right, and it was like, I know I'll get better, so I'm just going to set this one
Mhm.
aside till it looks like the way I want it to look in reality, the way I'm seeing it in my head.
Okay. Got it. Now, that actually kind of brings up a good point. Now, as like an artist and a creative, do you ever struggle with kind of like perfectionism of like you look at a sculpture and you're like, This looks really good, but it's not exactly 100% what I want," and then you wanna like retouch it or fix it up, or like have you kind of got to the point where you're like, this is kind of as good as it's gonna get. I know it's not 100% perfect, but it's good. It's what I wanted.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the level. Like
Okay.
some of the surface details where I'm like, oh, there's this little this divot's deeper than I want it to be, or this has because it has a I guess a rougher texture to it,
Okay.
and sometimes you can see where one batch is dried and then another batch was applied, and usually with once paint is applied, it's not as obvious, but with that sort of like just tiny surface imperfections, I have to like it was like I had the same problem when I worked in signing. It was like, all right, if I'm 12 inches away, do I notice it? I was like, all right,
Mhm.
if I'm 2 feet away, do I notice it? And it's like, then it's probably not that big a deal.
Right.
It's like there is some, you get into the minutia of things, and then you're just there forever. But with
Exactly.
larger, I guess, structural issues, then yeah, that's no fun. I've had things where, and one of my things is I like an interesting footprint. So like a traditional base on a sculpture is just it's not that interesting.
Right.
So that's one of the things where I had a sculpture with and the base was just incredibly boring, and I was like, all right, how do I make this better? And it took a while, and purely by accident, I was just playing with some plaster, and I had a mold, and I was like, oh, that's the thing I need now. Yeah, and that was quite some time later, and I'm like, that is exactly what I need. And then I changed
Yeah,
the whole atmosphere of the sculpture changed. It's like that's it. So
that's interesting. So, outside of that example, or just like in general, do you sometimes feel that like just like messing around with like sculpting, you might stumble upon some idea without even realizing kind of what you're doing?
yeah, I mean that's happened before. I know
Okay.
one good example is I was trying to make a life size crucifix,
Okay.
and so I was sculpting the face of Christ, and I wasn't crazy about it, and I was trying to clean up some of the clutter in my studio. I was like, all right, this is no good. Just not going to work for anything. I was like, so I was just throwing stuff out, and I squished the head flat, and then so the left side of the face and the right side of the face were looking at each other,
Okay.
and I was like, oh my gosh, that that is something I can use, and I actually fixed it in place as that and made another piece out of it.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I think it goes back to that idea of perspective, like just having that fresh perspective or a different
Yeah,
perspective. You might stumble upon something that like you didn't even realize was in the making.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Awesome. And I know that through the conversation you've kind of mentioned it maybe like the sculpting, it has like a rougher texture a bit and it's kind of like paper mache-esque. Like is that the best way to describe it? So it's kind of like, I guess, lighter in weight, if that makes sense, than like a metal sculpture, I guess.
It's definitely lighter than bronze, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, and I should do more now. Back in the day, I wanted to make everything like exclusively paper, so like the structure itself was made of layers of paper, or occasionally like a thicker, like a cardboard, but more like I guess like cereal box cardboard.
Okay.
And I was like, oh yeah, everything's and then like I'd use like water based glue and all that sort of thing. And I was like, well, this is stupid because this takes forever and it's not that strong and it's a pain in the ass. So, and then I switched to like hot glue and I used like wire frames and I not afraid. And what happened is they were just light, so they could get knocked over easily because they were a couple pounds.
Mhm.
So if they were tall, they weren't very stable. So I
Okay.
started weighting the bases with sand, and the sand was messy. And then I started weighting bases with plaster, and plaster's not quite as heavy. And then it can be problematic because of moisture issues. So, so now I'm using like it's metal and wire armatures, nice and stable structures.
Okay.
So
Got
it's a
it.
difference. And it's not, I know when people think paper mache, they think layers of like newspaper or whatever. But
Mhm.
it's, I don't know. If you, like I said, it's very much like celluclay. It's hard to describe the precise texture, but it is more of it's a rougher texture. It's not specifically smooth.
Okay. Got it. So, like and this is just me, like, trying to conceptualize it in the moment. So,
Yeah,
like, do you use, like, the wire frame and stuff to, like, build the structure itself, and then you coat it in, like, the paper mache-esque
essentially.
t
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Got it.
yeah.
So, like, I guess, out of curiosity, like, the average sculpture that you might put together, like, how much would that weigh?
Lately, probably somewhere between 5 and 10 pounds.
Okay. Okay, got it. But it's like, even though it's like that paper mache-esque rougher surface, it's still, like, durable, I would imagine. Like,
I
it's
mean, it's
it's
fairly durable. I mean, anything if you drop it, it's going to get damaged. I mean, bronze is not terribly, not terribly
Yeah,
strong. I mean, yeah, it's a little more durable. And in the early beginning, I was incredibly stingy with the material.
okay.
So it was like 16th of an inch, and now instead of that, it's somewhere between a half inch and an inch thick in some places.
Gotcha.
So it's definitely more durable than it used to be.
Okay, got it. So I thought of this question that I think is actually kinda interesting. So, Tim, like, if you if you have a sculpture that like you really like, or let's say you made one tomorrow that you really loved,
Mhm.
do you think you'd be able to replicate the exact same sculpture again? Or is it kind of like when it comes to sculpting, at least in your mind, is it like everything you do is almost like a one of one?
Yeah, I'd like to keep it one for one, and that's the thing. I know there's a temptation because, like, I have a friend who's he does like comic style art.
Okay.
He does a lot of watercolor, and then of course, especially with most 2D stuff, you can scan it and make prints,
Yeah.
and that's just not something. Every piece is one of a kind, and some of these things are older, and if I found if they were based on found objects, obviously I don't have a second one of those objects to recreate it,
Right.
and the motivation, the impetus is no longer there, so that makes a difference. And some of the stuff I'm reworking, like a moon face sculpture. I don't know exactly what the idea was back then. I think I was trying to make something a little lighter because
Okay.
most of my subject matter tends to lean dark. So I was like, I'll make something whimsical. Um, but like even that stuff, some of the stuff I don't remember how I made the internal structure. So
Okay.
because it's been years, and I'm like, oh, that was cool, but how did I make that again? It's like
Right.
I'd have to, I'd have to reverse engineer it or just make it a whole new way.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And with that kind of like one of one mentality when it comes to the things you're sculpting, as you're expanding upon your sculpting and turning this into more of something that you're pursuing seriously and everything, if you make a sculpture and you really love it, are you going to like want to keep things for yourself and just to be like, ah, this one's like this is super awesome. I want to keep this, for myself, for my family, or give it to, a friend or something? Or is it always going to be, whatever you make, you're willing to, let it go, if that makes sense?
I think it depends on the piece, and there's always
Okay.
like a cool down period. Like, for example, 2 years ago, yeah, about 2.5 years ago, my mother died,
Mhm.
and uh, I wasn't well, I wasn't prepared for that, obviously, because that kind of caught me off guard. But it took me a bit of time to figure out how to cope with that because
Mhm.
I wasn't in the best place in my marriage, so I couldn't really open up to my wife and be vulnerable to her, which is kind of sad. But you know,
Right.
luckily, it more or less coincided with the pandemic, so I took those few days off, went back to work, and then my stepson had a project he was dealing with. Um, he wanted to make a sculpture of a dolphin for school art show. I was like, all right, cool. I'll help you make that structure, and I probably did a little more than I should have on that. But I mean, he won first prize.
There you go.
Um, and I took like the leftover scrap of the armature, and I was just kind of playing with it, and I made a shape. And then I was like, okay, now I've made something. Now I can work with it. And so, like I said, I think I was off for 3 weeks when everything shut down for the pandemic. And during those 3 weeks, I worked on a sculpture that was basically, and I didn't realize it at the time. At first, I was just kind of toying with it. And I was like, oh, I'm making this to cope with the death of my mother. And I was like, cool, cool. Let's pour ourselves into this.
Mhm.
So, and it's always been more therapy for me as much as I guess anything else.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, first off, my condolences, for your loss. I know that, loss is always tough, and like you said, it's things you can't really prepare for. So I am sorry for your loss, but I think that makes sense that like art and sculpting has always been a passion of yours, and it kind of served as a way of therapy, a way to kind of cope and grieve with everything that was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess actually coming back to the whole point of me telling that story, like then of course I wouldn't have sold it, but
Hmm.
2 years later I'm like, okay, it served its purpose. I can part with this now,
Got it.
and I think that's most of the time with most sculptures where I was like, when I've just finished making, it's like, oh no, I could never part with this. This is my opus, and then and then a year later I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I've moved on.
Got it.
Just like, let's make some money.
Right. Okay. And now, kind of like you mentioned, that you might sculpt something and be like, this is my opus, this is my life's work, this is the greatest creation. And then, a year later, you might be like, yeah, that served its purpose. You moved on. With that same mentality, do you think that, like, do you continuously see growth or changes with your sculpting as the years go on? Or is it sometimes like if you look back to something you did a few years ago, are you like, wow, what was I even thinking then? Like, I'm so much more better now? Or is it not always necessarily that crystal clear, if that makes sense?
I think there's a few exceptional pieces where I was like, wow, that was really good. And it's like, how
Yeah,
did and I was like, I know I did that. It's like, how did I do that?
right.
That's really good. But no, there's a piece I'm working on now, and originally it was kind of filler because I had a show in 2010.
Okay.
It was 2010. Um, at a local gallery space, and they had a lot of wall space. And of course, I did 3D stuff. So I was like, oh, I'm going to make stuff so that I can hang on the wall. And I made something that was basically a dome, kind of I guess, a hollow space in it. I called it Spot. And I was like, all right, Spot is incredibly plain and boring. And the place that I made to hang it had already broken. So I was like, I'm going to turn Spot into a really cool 3D sculpture. So I kind of put like a curvy tail on it, and then I was doing some stuff with casts of my ex-wife's face while she was still my wife, and I made some interesting contours in it, and then I brought it home when I moved, and I was like, all right, this sucks. I don't know where I was going with it, but it's still trash.
Yeah.
And eventually, I was like, all right, so how do I make this good? And it was like, I can't make it good the way it is.
Yeah.
So I cut it in half and essentially cut it in half. Not perfectly in half, and all the parts with my ex-wife's face are on one side. That's become a sculpture called Eye of the Storm, and then the other smaller half, I put a second tail on it, and it's actually just about done being sculpted now. And I don't think I have a name for that quite yet, but come up with something.
Okay.
But yeah, so sometimes you gotta destroy to make it better.
Yeah. That's fair. That's a good point. And I think that that's something that, obviously that applies to your sculpting and the art, just like the art field, I guess you could say. But I think that that's, just with anything, sometimes you have to take things apart or, start over or keep like the basic foundation, but rework it, in life to make it make a little more sense. So I think that makes a lot of sense what you're explaining. But you mentioned naming your art.
Mhm.
Is there anything that like special process that goes into naming it, or do the names just come to you, or is there anything that gives you inspiration for naming them?
Yeah, I mean, with earlier on, I would name things after. I would usually reference music that I was listening at the time of making it. So
Okay.
there's some like Nine Inch Nail references and some Typo Negative references to some of the art. I like a good pun every now and again, tongue in cheek stuff.
Okay.
And I vowed to, since my work is more abstract, I vowed not to say, oh, this is untitled. Because, if I take a picture of a house and it's untitled and you're like, okay, it's a picture of a house, cool. But if I make this amorphous, shape and then I tell you nothing,
Yeah.
I like to give people a general idea of what I was thinking.
Got it. Okay. Is there any sculptures that you've named that you're especially proud of the name that you came up with?
Uh, I mean, all of them are amusing in some way.
Okay.
There's a few where I've forgotten the names. I was like, what the hell do I call that? No. And then if I can't remember, sometimes I'll make up a new name and I'm like, oh, wait, that's not the original name. And I was like, oh,
Sure.
man. It's like, but this is funny too.
Yeah.
But no, around the time of the sculpture, I made it was a little difficult. It's difficult to describe precisely, but it was basically a column with a platform, and I had my face kind of being suspended by two prongs, two wires coming out kind of where the chin is, and two going up um, above the brow.
Okay.
And then I had basically what looked like a rusty iron rod going through, well, essentially my head, um, going through the temples and out the other side. And that one I called Piercing Insight. And actually, that's what I called the show at the time, was Piercing Insight.
Okay. I like that. That's awesome. Similar to that question, like, is there a sculpture that you've done in your whole career that really stands out to you, or that's especially just like something that you're proud of, or that you'll always, consider to be one of your favorite works you've done?
Hmm. One of the first, I always remember the first time I used a mold, like the first mold where I used my own face um, for paper mache, um, self portrait called "The Warm Place." That's actually the title of a Nine Inch Nails song. So, but then like the first time I used my ex girlfriend's face, um, it was shortly. It was like, so basically, what happened is I cast her face in December. We broke up in January, and then the first sculpture I made was probably around February or March.
Okay.
It was called "The Dream Upon Waking," and it was. But I guess that makes more sense when you see the sculpture, which is kind of it's her face, but it's kind of, I guess, disintegrating in a way.
Mm. Got it.
Because I had actually screwed up the casting of the mold. So it came out kind of funky, and I followed the contours.
Got it.
And then I've used her face quite a bit. She had a great face for sculpture.
Okay.
Very prominent features.
So you've mentioned kind of like just various faces that you've used when it comes to your sculpting. Does a lot of your sculptures just focus around like a face as like the kind of main focal point?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
But I guess that's kind of the trap I fell into, and I've been trying to move away from it.
Okay.
Because I'd make an abstract shape, and it was like, yeah, but if I put a face on it, it'd be that much cooler. And so I'd make the sculpture, and then I was like, oh, I'm just gonna add this here, and I was like, oh, I've done it again.
Got it.
It's like I didn't mean to do that, but I mean, some are where the face is the focal point, and like the original impetus, and like sometimes I'm just like I'll make abstract shapes, and I'll like, I'd like to add a face, and I was like, oh, why'd I do that?
Got it.
But
Okay.
so yeah, that's the thing with like I said, the split between
Yeah.
the old spot, which is now Eye of the Storm with
Yep.
the ex-wife, and then the other part of it has no faces on it, and it's going to stay that way.
Okay, good. I'm holding you to that. So, is there any other type of art that you'd want to do someday or want to try out, or is it really primarily just going to be sculpting for you?
Like I said, I do have the materials to paint. I just
Yeah.
haven't had the, I guess, the motivation to do it. And I've painted in leisure occasionally, where you've done like the what is it, the paint and pour sort of thing. We've done a couple of those. I've done all right with that. But at the same time, I just like to get my hands in there.
Yeah. Okay. And Tim, you mentioned, now is kind of like a good time for you to start, putting more time into your art and sculpting and see where you can take it. Like, do you have any overarching goals that like specifically you want to accomplish or pursue with that?
Ideally, I'd make it a primary income source. So that makes the price point for, one and done sculptures kind of on the high end.
Mhm.
But I've had price points on the low end back in the day, and that didn't work out. So I may as well raise the prices on them.
Right.
Put the effort in. But then there's other things in terms of, I guess, creative stuff I'd like to pursue with there's some writing. I've got some
Okay.
story ideas, and I've actually made sculptures based on those stories ideas. And that's the thing. And I made those sculptures not really to sell, just so I'd see it and say, oh yeah, I should write that story.
Okay. Got it. And
But yeah, and then of course that's the sort of thing, if you're actually successful at, I mean, I can sell more than one copy of a book.
right. Yeah, that you can. So you mentioned making like a primary income from your art and from the sculpting. Do you think that that's something that, you'd want to be, I guess, making a significant amount of money with your art where you feel like then, okay, maybe I don't need to work my part-time gig. I can just fully do art? Or do you think it's always going to be like do both and then when you see like do you think you're basically going to want to balance the two, or do you think you're going to want to go all in on the art at some point, even if you haven't officially made that primary income from it yet?
Well, I mean, that's kind of where this, in a sense, like I said, I come from a blue collar mentality. So
Okay.
even going part time is kind of, I guess, goes against my upbringing. Or like,
Yeah.
hey, you could be working more, and it's like, but I am working. I'm just
Right.
making the money yet, and I mean that's the idea, is to start making money doing something I want to do all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's the where some people would have that concern, is like, yeah, but then if you have to do it, then it becomes more of a chore, and then, but I guess I'd worry about that when it actually happens.
Yeah. That's a good point because yeah, I think a lot of people do say that like if you're really passionate about something, you really enjoy it, once you use that as your full-time, job or full, source of income, then it becomes more of work and not, enjoyable. But I don't know. I think like you said, you can cross that bridge when you get there, but also I think that like if you truly are passionate about something and you just go in and have fun with it, I think you can still, keep that balance.
Right, right, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I've worked at Target for years, and I
Hmm.
did a couple other things where, and this does kind of surprise me when I say it myself sometimes, that I miss that aspect of customer service, which is weird to me
Yeah.
because, I mean, I'm not a big people person, but I guess I'm a bigger people person than other people. I,
Okay.
I mean, I like to spend plenty of time on my own, but at the same time, I don't know. I just like making people happy.
Yeah. So based off that, do you think that maybe like even if you get to that point, say next year, where your art is providing you, that primary source of income, do you think you would still want to work in some sort of customer service capacity just for like that human interaction and making people happy and helping others?
Um, maybe,
Okay.
maybe less than I am now, or maybe I'd pursue more um, like live theater
Okay.
locally, and then I don't know. I mean, I'm not opposed to, of course, other things, but I've been in a few plays. I've had some acting experience, some theater
Hmm.
training, and done that. And then, but that's the weird thing too about that, is where I get into the character of it, and then you're like, "Oh, you're so great." And it's like, it's not me; it's just a character I play. She's like, "I don't know what you're talking about."
So it sounds like, Tim, you might have to like write a screenplay and then sculpt something to like symbolize it and then act in your own screenplay.
Well, like I said, the sculpture I've got, the story idea I've got, and of course, once you write the book, writing the screenplay based on the book is easy. So,
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So really, even though like the main kind of focus is sculpting, it sounds like kind of just like the creative arts is where the passion for you lies.
most definitely.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. And with the sculptures that you have, I know you mentioned you've sold some before, and as you continue to make them, the goal is to sell them for that primary source of income, of course. Do you currently have sculptures that you are selling or willing to sell?
Yeah, I've got a whole lot I'm willing to sell. I don't really have any price lists made
Okay.
currently. I've submitted a few to a gallery show. They were not accepted because the emphasis of that show is mostly 2D art. There was like one sculpture out of 163 pieces. So that was disappointing, but yeah, I entered them into the show with the mind of selling them, and that's specifically why I mentioned the one piece related to my mother's death, and then there was a couple others, and so yeah,
Okay.
working on a website right now. There's just there's like a Facebook page at t.m.schantz Facebook page. I don't know what Facebook does with its storefronts, but I think it gets a little funkier every time I go on it.
Yeah, that's fair.
I got to make a proper website, get
Okay.
everything on there.
Okay. Perfect. Well, yeah, I mean, I will put your Facebook page in the description of the episode. So anyone listening, if you want to check out Tim's art, you can do that. Or just if you want to, reach out or connect with him that way and ask him about his art or, talk about potentially buying some of his art or anything, you can contact him that way. But yeah, I get what you mean with Facebook, storefronts being a little interesting, but I think, yeah, once you have a website, that'll definitely help, and it'll be cool to kind of make that your own and use creative, liberties on it as well.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just me because sometimes I'll be navigating. I'm like, is it this funky when other people come to visit?
Right. Right. Exactly. No, I get you. But no, I think that's really cool. And I think that, as you continue to make sculptures and whatnot and get the website up and so you can start like posting, prices and pictures and all that stuff. I think that, the art that I've seen, you showed me quite a few different of your sculptures and they're they're very interesting. They're very, detailed and just it's really to me like it's always been thought provoking. Like I'll see it and I'll be like, that really makes me think of something or it really tries to convey a story. So I think the artwork that I've seen, at least that you've done, is stuff that would be kind of like a good talking point. Like if you have it, in a building, in a house, wherever, when people see it, they're gonna have like thoughts on it or questions, or it's gonna start a conversation of some sort.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something I was taught early on was, make it interesting.
Hmm.
And I think that the most prominent question was always, does it provoke a response?
Okay. That's a good way to look at it. Does it provoke a response? And I think that goes back to what you're saying earlier about like, not wanting to be boring with it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of art, there's a lot of artists, a lot of sculptures. So I think at the same point, like you kind of want to stand out and be a little different, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not the intention to be different. It's just
Okay.
you happen to be different. And
Right.
it's not the sort of thing where you just do it for shock value. It's just like, this is what I was thinking, and this is how I expressed it while I was thinking about it.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So
They
Tim,
do
one
they do tend to go on the darker side, unfortunately.
yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I would also say again, from what I've seen, it does tend to be on the little darker side, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, and I definitely think that there's 100% a market for it. But also, again, like even if it's considered to be dark, it does provoke thoughts or emotions or just like provokes a question, or it can be a good like speaking point.
Yeah.
Based on that, I know you mentioned like in the past you thought like, oh, I'm gonna try something whimsical. Do you think you're gonna try to do stuff like that again, or do you think you may have like found your niche with like kind of like horror, art?
Yeah. Like I said, it doesn't always start that way. It just
Right.
ends up that way.
Sure.
But no, like the whimsical thing, like there's a piece I'm redoing. Um so and
Okay.
it was in storage for a long time. Like I said, I set it aside and I was like, I don't like the way this is turning out. And now I'm better at making faces. And I was like, oh, that's the problem. He's got no cheeks and he looks weird. He's got this flat face. So I was like, oh yeah, people have bones in their face. I should put those on the sculpture. But so I'm redoing that. And
Okay.
it's getting there. And there's other things that have been more whimsical, but
Okay.
they tend to be smaller pieces. And I suppose it takes a certain sense of humor to find
Got it.
other
Okay.
parts where they're just, I mean, some of them are entertaining for different reasons.
Sure.
But Yeah, there's a couple. The problem
Okay.
is when you miss it whimsical, and then it's creepy for the wrong sorts of reasons.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Got it. Well, Tim, one of the last things that I wanted to ask you is like to anyone that's listening who might have interest in sculpting or art or anything of the sort, or maybe they're kind of into it a little bit, like they've taken a course or a class, but they're still kind of finding their way. Do you have any advice for anyone that's kind of wanting to get started or new to art or sculpting specifically?
Golly, not too much. I mean, if you do decent work with, I guess the more commercially available materials, like if you can go to Michaels or whatever, and you get a basic kit and it looks good when you do it there, then of course it's only going to look better when you use higher quality materials from like Dick Blick or whatever.
Okay.
I know that, but yeah, I've had friends. I have a friend who's totally awesome at watercolor. At least he was when we were like in that survey course where I met him. I met him in a like I said, a intro to art course freshman year, my freshman year, and we've been friends for the last whatever 30 years, but 32 years. So that was a good class for me.
Yeah.
But he did this watercolor and it was outstanding. And he doesn't give a shit about art.
Got it. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. So kind of just like, you know, kind of almost like start small, and if like you can make do with limited materials, then once you get, better, higher
Yeah.
quality, it'll be even better.
I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, I started with, like I said, it was a little thing. I started with little stuff, and then it just kind of grew from there.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think most people would be very surprised because there's so many people who's like, "Oh, I could never do that," and it's like, "Have you tried? Because if you try it, you might find out you have a talent for it."
Okay. And that's actually a curious point because I was thinking like, do you think that something like sculpting or art in general, do you think that that's like something that you are kind of like a born with skill, or do you think that's something that you develop over time if you
Uh,
really work hard enough at it?
I mean, you definitely develop over time if you have the passion to pursue it. I mean, I don't
Okay.
know. It's kind of hard to judge. Like, am I a good sculptor? I don't know. How would I compare to other sculptors? You know what I mean?
True.
Like, am I as good as Michelangelo? No, I can tell you that right now.
Right.
He's like, could I work with marble? And that's the thing. I'm not a reductive sculptor. I'm an additive sculptor. So, and it's a completely different medium. So, am I as good as Rodin? That's harder to say. Probably not, but I'm not that bad.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, that makes sense because I don't know. I just think about like drawing or sketching, for example. Like
Yeah.
I look at some people that are like, "Oh, I'm just gonna sketch something in like 5 minutes in," and they have this like masterpiece, and then I try to do the same thing in 5 minutes, and it's like a stick figure or something. So,
Yeah. I mean, that
like,
makes a difference too. But like,
yeah,
I mean, for instance, life
sure,
drawing. My first class, life drawing, I went from bad to mediocre.
okay,
And then the second class, I went from mediocre to pretty decent. It looked good, and I knew what I was doing, and I could show depth and things. People looked like people because before that they didn't look so good.
got it.
And then more importantly, it wasn't just that the people looked like people. It was an interesting picture to look at because it was it's about choosing the right angle and the lighting and shading and
Hmm.
what you do with the lines. It was more lively. I learned to, I guess, do it differently. I wasn't trying to create a photorealistic picture. I was trying to make an interesting drawing.
Okay,
So it doesn't look real, but you can
yeah,
tell it's a person, and it looks good.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's an important kind of thing to keep in mind with art, that art is very subjective and,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be like, I mean, I think of like paintings that I've seen that I'll look at it and I'll be like, I have no idea what this is. It looks like it's like a blob, but like some people think it's like the greatest art they've ever seen. So
Right.
it is subjective, and I think like if you do have that passion for it, do what interests you, do what you enjoy, and I guarantee you a lot of people will also feel the same. But then there probably will be a lot of people who don't understand it, but that's okay too.
Right. Yeah, that's the weird thing. Like when you get into the weeds of like painting, you're like, well, this is about color theory and field painting, and it's more of like an intellectual exercise about painting.
Yeah.
Like, and then what people don't realize is when they're like, oh, I could do that, and he's like, yeah, and he did it. He did it first, and before he did that, he studied art for like 25 years,
Right.
and he could, he did all sorts of like amazing things with paint, but then he was like reducing something to like a very specific idea, and it
Right.
took him 25 years to get to that point.
Yeah.
So it makes a difference.
It does. That's good perspective though, because I think yeah, like people will see something and be like, yeah, I could just do that, by throwing some paint on a canvas. But there's a lot of theory and practice and studying that went into the purpose of that in the first place.
Yeah, and if all you want to do is decorate a wall, then by all means, go buy yourself some canvases and slap some paint on it, hang it on the wall.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, perfect. Yeah, so as we mentioned, I'll put Tim's Facebook page in the description of the episode, so you can go there and check out his artwork and connect with him that way. And then I will also I can update this so when Tim does have a website up, we can also include that to make sure that you're able to check it out there as well. But Tim, as we're wrapping things up, do you have any last like thoughts or message that you want to leave to anyone that's listening to the podcast today?
Golly, not specifically, but yeah, I would say, yeah, if you have a creative impulse, definitely pursue it.
Perfect. I agree with that. If there is something that's, creative or that's calling you, go for it. I think that it can be intimidating and scary to get started, but I think that, everyone starts somewhere. And, even if you're starting off as a beginner or new to something, don't get discouraged because it takes time and practice and repetition. But as long as you're enjoying it, and you have that passion for it, that's all that matters.
Yeah, most definitely.
Awesome. All right, Tim. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great time talking with you, and I'm really excited to continue to see the artwork that you put out and maybe other creative endeavors that you have interest in. I'm excited to follow along in your journey, and I'll definitely be looking forward to seeing some of the artwork once it's wrapped up.
Almost definitely. Yeah, I have to find a way to motivate myself as easily as I do with making the sculptures, with
There
the
you
other
go.
pursuits.
Well, I believe in you. You can do it. All right, Tim. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
See ya.